This year marks the 400th anniversary of the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade in the United States, where millions of Africans were kidnapped and taken to the Americas to be sold into slavery. While in captivity, Africans faced some of the most inhumane and brutal conditions imaginable. But one African country is reaching out to the descendants of those lost to offer them a path back to their ancestral home. Welcome to DC Direct. I'm Lionel Donovan. Here in this show, we talk about some of the bigger stories, but we want you to weigh in. So feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, and use the hashtag DC Direct to be a part of the conversation. In today's show, we'll be talking about Ghana's Year of the Return. Ghana's call to the diaspora has not gone unheard. Dr. Kelechi Egwim, who's frequently traveled to Africa, recently brought a group of African Americans to visit Ghana for the first time. Dr. Egwim hopes that Ghana's initiative acts as an example for other countries and encourages those in the diaspora to come back to the continent.
It's always really a magical thing whenever an African diaspora comes back to the continent. We know that so much effort is put towards dividing us from our ancestral home. A lot of misinformation, a lot of propaganda. So whenever Africans in the diaspora come back, it's an overwhelming and emotional experience. People want to, kiss the tarmac as soon as they land. That African air, that energy, that wind, especially when you're close to the ocean, you can hear the water. It's really a powerful experience.
U.S. historians mark the beginning of the slave trade at 1619, when a group of African slaves were brought to the colony of Virginia. But African slave trading began much earlier, in the 15th century, when Portuguese merchants bought African people that were sold as slaves during tribal wars. But what exactly was the logistics of the transatlantic slave trade? Nearly every European nation that traded in the Atlantic Ocean was involved in the slave trade. Ships would travel from Europe to the western coast of Africa with textiles to load up on people, then travel to the Americas to sell them, then head back to Europe with products such as sugar, rum, cotton, and tobacco. The trip was highly dangerous and could last up to 3 months. It's estimated that 1 in 5 Africans died during the journey. This process continued until around 1870.
You can only imagine when people knew that they were being taken away from their land, their motherland, their society, and they are in chains and put into these slave ships like sardines. And some of them, history tells us, even tried or succeeded in jumping off the ships into the sea and dying, of course, there. And any form of rebellion, any form of dissent was very harshly punished, because those who were transporting them, to them, this is merchandise.
Slaves would have to endure continuous abuse in horrendous conditions as their very humanity was stripped away. But Ghana is now calling for the descendants of those taken to come back to their ancestral lands. Ghana has always served as a beacon in Pan-African movements around the world. Its first president, Kwame Nkrumah, once declared that all people of African descent, no matter where they live, will always be African and belong in Africa. Last year, the Ghanaian government reinforced those sentiments by declaring 2019 as the Year of Return, an initiative that includes activities and events designed to encourage those in the diaspora to find a new home in Ghana. The initiative is also designed to highlight Ghana's right to abode immigration law, which allows a person of African descent in the diaspora to stay and work in Ghana indefinitely without a need for a visa or work permit.
There is a large movement towards welcoming people of African descent home, organizationally speaking. United States President Barack Obama said this: no one but Africans will have to develop Africa. And that statement is beginning to sink in.
Jermaine feels that the Year of Return sends a strong message to those outside the African nation.
The message is loud and clear. We want you back home. And it is entirely plausible that descendants of former slaves now, after 400 years, are very comfortable where they live, and so they call those places home. But Ghana is opening its arms to those descendants, if they're looking to have an option to come back home, either to live or to invest or most of the things that people do normally. In other words, return home, see where you left, and then you decide what you want to do.
It's imperative for Africans in diaspora to recognize that they have far more opportunity to grow individually, as families, as communities, by investing in and being part of the community on the continent, whatever community it happens to be. And you can't do it from a distance as well as you can do it being there. And I know so many people who have moved back to Ghana, moved back to Senegal, moved back to Nigeria. I see that happening more and more because the West is not becoming any more hospitable for us. So, what else do? You go home. And when you go home, you realize that, that stress and suffering that I was trying to endure, I didn't really have to. So I think more and more that realization will bring people back home.
The transatlantic slave trade left a huge impact on the globe, but further colonial occupation prevented Africa from dealing with the scars of its past. But Ghana and other African nations are growing and establishing themselves on the world stage. And in that process, this allows them to reconnect with the descendants of those lost to bring them back home. Well, that's all the time we have today in DC Direct, but please be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at TRT World. And reach out to us with the hashtag DC Direct and let us know what you think about the year of return. Until next time, I'm Lionel Donovan.